The porcelain cup sat before me on Vanessa's immaculate tablecloth, innocuous, yet threatening. Steam rose in gentle curls, carrying an aroma that wasn't quite right. A subtle metallic undercurrent beneath the rich coffee scent that made my stomach clench with instinctive warning. "Don't you want to try the coffee? I made it especially for you, darling." Marcus said, his voice pitched with an unnatural lightness. My husband of 3 years leaned against the polished cherrywood sideboard in his sister's formal dining room, watching me with an expression I'd grown increasingly wary of, a smile that transformed his handsome features without ever reaching his eyes. The morning light filtering through Vanessa's floor-to-ceiling windows cast half his face in shadow, a fitting metaphor for the man I'd begun to realize I never truly knew. We were gathered for the monthly family brunch, a tradition Vanessa had instituted shortly after Marcus and I married, ostensibly to strengthen family bonds. In reality, these brunches had become battlegrounds of subtle warfare, elaborate meals, where I invariably found myself ill afterward, each incident dismissed as coincidence or weakness on my part. "How thoughtful of you," I replied, my voice steady despite the rapid pounding of my heart. At 32, I'd built a successful career navigating high-stakes corporate negotiations, yet nothing had prepared me for suspecting my own husband of something so unfathomable. I lifted the cup slightly, pretending to admire the delicate floral pattern adorning its surface. Another of Vanessa's calculated displays of wealth and taste. Vanessa watched me from across the table, her manicured fingers idly stirring her own untouched coffee. At 38, she possessed the kind of effortless elegance that appeared in high-end magazines, sleek chestnut hair framing aristocratic features, designer clothing that whispered rather than shouted money. But there was something predatory in her gaze this morning, an anticipation that made the fine hairs on my neck stand on end. Marcus has become quite the coffee aficionado lately, she remarked, her voice dripping with honey-coated venom. "He's been experimenting with different brewing methods just for you." The emphasis she placed on those final 2 words sent a chill crawling down my spine. I'd noticed Marcus spending increasing amounts of time at Vanessa's sprawling Nashville mansion, always with vague explanations about anniversary surprises or family matters that required privacy, the whispered conversations that abruptly ceased when I entered rooms, the strange texts glimpsed on his phone before he hastily put it away, the convenient excuses whenever I fell ill after sharing meals with them. And now this coffee with its distinctive wrong smell, like the tea last month that had sent me to urgent care with symptoms the doctors found baffling. "It's a special blend," Marcus added, pushing himself away from the sideboard to take his seat at the table. "Imported rare." His fingers tapped an irregular rhythm against the polished wood, betraying the nervousness his relaxed posture attempted to conceal. I lifted the cup to my lips, making a show of inhaling the aroma while my mind raced through escape routes. "It smells unique," I murmured, tilting the cup, as if to take a sip without allowing the liquid to touch my lips. Over the rim, I studied their expressions, the momentary glance exchanged between them, laden with meaning and expectation. My suspicions crystallized into certainty. In that instant, whatever was in that cup, it wasn't meant to nurture. I lowered the coffee and checked my watch with manufactured surprise. Oh, I completely forgot about the conference call with Tokyo. I placed the cup down and reached for my phone. "It's scheduled for..." I made a show of scrolling through my calendar. 9:30. That's in 10 minutes. I looked up at Vanessa with apologetic eyes. "Would you mind terribly if I used your study? I promise to be quick." Vanessa's perfect features arranged themselves into a mask of graciousness. "Of course, Elise. You know where it is down the hall. Second door on the left. Thank you." I stood deliberately catching my hip against the edge of the table as I rose. "Oh," I exclaimed as I steadied myself, using the moment of confusion to switch my coffee cup with Vanessa's in a move so swift it would have made a magician proud. "I'm so sorry I'm such a klutz sometimes. Just try not to break anything in the study," Vanessa replied with a tight smile that didn't reach her glacial blue eyes. "Some of those books are first editions." I nodded contritely and made my way toward the study, my heart thundering against my ribs. Once inside the doorway, I positioned myself where I could observe the dining room through the partially open door. My phone clutched in my hand, already set to record. The heavy curtains in Vanessa's study filtered the morning sunlight into a dim glow that barely illuminated the leather-bound volumes lining the walls. The room smelled of old paper and expensive cologne. Marcus's cologne. How many hours had he spent here plotting with his sister? The thought sent another chill through me as I watched Vanessa lift the coffee cup, my coffee cup, to her perfectly painted lips. My fingers tightened around my phone. Part of me wanted to rush forward to stop her, to issue a warning, but a stronger part needed confirmation, needed irrefutable proof of what I'd suspected for months. I'd spent too many nights doubled over in pain, too many days functioning through waves of inexplicable nausea, too many hours being convinced by Marcus that I was imagining things, being paranoid, becoming unstable. I watched as Vanessa took a delicate sip, her expression composed. Marcus was absorbed in his phone, seemingly unconcerned, tapping out a message with casual indifference. My own cup, the one intended for me, sat cold and untouched on the table. Its contents, a mystery I had no intention of solving with my body. 3 years ago, when I met Marcus at a gallery opening in downtown Nashville, he'd been charming, attentive, seemingly the antithesis of the emotionally distant men I dated before. With his architect's eye for detail and his impressive knowledge of art, he'd swept me off my feet in a whirlwind romance that culminated in a wedding that featured in several local society pages. Vanessa had been welcoming then, or at least she'd appeared to be offering her home for our engagement party, suggesting florists and caterers, inserting herself into every decision with what I'd mistakenly interpreted as sisterly enthusiasm. The first incident had been subtle, a breakfast at their family lake house where I'd been violently ill afterward. Food poisoning Marcus had suggested, probably from the restaurant we'd visited the previous evening. Then came the dinner party where my plate somehow contained shellfish, despite my well-known allergy requiring an EpiPen and an emergency room visit. An honest mistake Vanessa had insisted, claiming miscommunication with the caterers. The pattern emerged slowly, each illness following meals prepared or handled by Vanessa or Marcus, each episode slightly worse than the last, each recovery period longer, and always their concern, their care, their subtle suggestions that perhaps I should scale back my work responsibilities, that the stress was affecting my health. A slight tremor in Vanessa's hand caught my attention, pulling me back to the present. She set down the cup, a flicker of confusion crossing her perfect features. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silent house. "Something's wrong." Marcus looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from distraction to confusion to horrified realization. In the span of seconds, he jumped up the chair, toppling backward with a crash that echoed through the high-ceilinged room. "Vanessa, what's happening?" Vanessa's hands were trembling violently, now rattling the cup against its saucer. I feel... She attempted to stand but stumbled, grabbing the edge of the table for support. Marcus, what did you put in that coffee? I stepped out of the study, my phone recording the unfolding scene. Marcus had rushed to Vanessa's side, his face ashen sweat beading on his forehead. That wasn't supposed to be your cup. He whispered the words, carrying with perfect clarity in the hushed dining room. Vanessa's eyes widened with realization and fear. Call an ambulance! She gasped, sliding toward the floor despite Marcus's attempt to support her. Please, I can't breathe right. I dialed 911, immediately my voice steady, as I relayed the address and situation to the dispatcher. Yes, 1478 Bellevue Avenue. My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She is conscious but experiencing tremors and difficulty breathing. As I spoke, Vanessa's eyes locked onto mine from where she now sat on the floor. Marcus kneeling beside her, in panic. The usual cold calculation in her gaze had given way to raw, animal fear. Elise! She gasped, her perfectly manicured hand clutching at her throat. You switched, you knew! Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way. The dispatcher assured me through the phone. Please remain on the line. Marcus's composure was unraveling by the second. Vanessa, what's happening that wasn't supposed to? I mean, it wasn't meant for... His voice cracked as he looked wildly between his sister and me. Shut up, Marcus! Vanessa hissed through gritted teeth, her anger momentarily eclipsing her distress. This is all your fault. You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the Goldstein presentation next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced. My blood ran cold at her words. The Goldstein account, a multi-million-dollar client I'd spent months courting the presentation that could cement my position as the youngest partner in my firm's history. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The tea last month, I said, my voice surprisingly steady as I continued recording. And the dinner in April. Those weren't accidents, were they? Vanessa's face contorted with another wave of pain, her breathing becoming more labored. The tea that was supposed to keep you home during the Westbrook contract presentation. But you went anyway. She clutched her stomach, doubling over. Marcus said we just needed to discredit you. Make clients think you were unreliable. The wail of approaching sirens filled the air. Marcus stood up, backing away from both of us as though trying to distance himself from the situation, from the truth. Vanessa, stop talking. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Vanessa spat her words, beginning to slur slightly. We've been planning this for months, ever since Elise started taking clients that should have been mine. You were supposed to make sure she drank it today. The front door burst open as paramedics rushed in, equipment in hand. I stepped aside, directing them toward Vanessa, while continuing to record. She drank coffee that I believe was tampered with. I explained calmly. My husband prepared it, and it was originally intended for me. Marcus stood frozen by the sideboard, watching as the paramedics assessed his sister. I never meant to. He stammered, but his protests died on his lips as one of the paramedics asked what substance might have been in the coffee. I don't know. I answered honestly. But this isn't the first time I've been experiencing similar symptoms after meals with them for months. As the paramedics loaded Vanessa onto a stretcher, I stopped the recording and sent the video to my private email, then forwarded it to my attorney. Marcus remained rooted in place, his handsome features distorted by fear, as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. I'll ride with her to the hospital. I informed the paramedics, my voice leaving no room for argument. After all, I need to ensure my sister-in-law receives the proper treatment. I met Marcus's terrified gaze with unflinching calm. And I'm sure the doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee. Metropolitan General Hospital's emergency department hummed with controlled chaos monitors, beeping staff calling to one another in medical shorthand, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished floors. I sat in the waiting area, my phone clutched tightly in one hand, replaying the morning's events in my mind, while the seconds ticked by on the utilitarian wall clock overhead. The recording of Vanessa's inadvertent confession was safely backed up to 3 different locations. Now I'd spoken briefly with Detective Reina Morales on the phone. My attorney had been notified, and hospital security had been alerted to watch for Marcus. The adrenaline that had carried me through the morning was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a hollow ache in my chest where trust had once resided. Family of Vanessa Thornfield. A nurse in blue scrubs called from the doorway leading to the treatment areas. I stood noting that Marcus had yet to appear after mumbling something about parking the car nearly 40 minutes ago. "I'm her sister-in-law," I replied, following the nurse through double doors that whispered shut behind us. "How is she?" "She's stabilized, but Dr. Abernathy found concerning levels of toxins in her system." The nurse's expression was grave, her eyes assessing me with professional curiosity. "The doctor would like to speak with you about some unusual findings in her blood work." The treatment bay where they'd placed Vanessa was screened off from the main emergency department, creating the illusion of privacy in the bustling space. Dr. Abernathy, a woman in her 50s with silver-threaded dark hair pulled into a practical bun, was reviewing digital charts on a tablet when we arrived. "Mrs. Thornfield." She greeted me, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Abernathy, the attending physician. Could you tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law became ill?" I took a measured breath, centering myself before retrieving my phone. "I think you should listen to this first." I played the recording from brunch, watching the doctor's expression shift from professional concern to alarm as Vanessa's damning words filled the small space. "You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the Goldstein presentation. This is extremely serious," Dr. Abernathy said, making notes on her tablet with efficient strokes. "The substance we've identified in Ms. Thornfield's blood isn't something that accidentally finds its way into coffee. We're looking at deliberate contamination with what appears to be a pharmaceutical-grade compound not approved for human consumption." The sound of raised voices drew our attention to the corridor outside the treatment bay. Marcus had finally arrived, his normally impeccable appearance, disheveled his face, flushed as he argued with a security guard. He'd clearly overheard the doctor's assessment. "Elise." He called, catching sight of me through the partially open curtain. "Let me explain. This isn't what it looks like." "Sir, please lower your voice," the security guard warned, positioning himself between Marcus and the treatment area. "Stay back," Dr. Abernathy instructed firmly, pressing the emergency call button beside Vanessa's bed. "Security to Bay 7, please." Marcus raised his hands in a placating gesture, his architect's fingers the same ones that had traced paths along my skin in more innocent times, trembling visibly. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding." Vanessa was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. Really. I countered, finding strength in the righteous anger flowing through me. I pulled up the texts I'd discovered on his phone the previous week. Messages I'd forwarded to my private account after a nagging suspicion had prompted me to check his phone while he showered. So, these messages between you and Vanessa about ensuring I'm out of commission before the Goldstein presentation were just friendly sibling banter. The color drained from Marcus's face. You went through my phone after I found the unlabeled pharmaceutical vials in your desk drawer. Yes, I did. I turned back to Dr. Abernathy, who was observing our exchange with clinical interest. Doctor, I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months. With unexplained symptoms, I'd like to know if they match what you found in Vanessa's system today. The doctor's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. We'll need to run comparative tests, but based on your description of symptoms, she glanced at her tablet where she'd noted my earlier explanation. There are concerning similarities. We should take blood samples immediately. 2 security guards appeared flanking Marcus, who now looked trapped and diminished his confident facade crumbling before my eyes. The police have been notified. One of the guards informed him. They've requested you remain on premises for questioning. Vanessa and I... Marcus stammered desperation, edging his voice. We were just trying to help you slow down. You were working too hard, taking all the major clients. Vanessa said if we could just make you take some time off by poisoning me. The words hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. How considerate of you both. From her hospital bed, Vanessa stirred her eyes, fluttering open. The sophisticated poise she typically wielded like armor had been stripped away by medical necessity. Her designer outfit replaced by a hospital gown. Her perfect makeup smudged her sleek hair tangled against the stark white pillow. She looked smaller, somehow diminished by the truth coming to light. Marcus. She rasped, her voice hoarse from the treatment she'd received. Shut up. You're making it worse. Her gaze shifted to me, calculation replacing the earlier fear. Elise, this isn't what you think. We were trying to protect you from yourself. You've been working too hard, pushing yourself to the breaking point. We would just save it for the detectives. I interrupted, a coldness settling over me. They're on their way, and I imagine they'll be very interested in the collection of substances Marcus has been keeping in his desk. As if summoned by my words, Detective Morales appeared in the doorway, her badge displayed on the belt of her crisp pantsuit. Mrs. Thornfield, I'm Detective Raina Morales. I received your call. Her sharp gaze took in the scene, Marcus flanked by security. Vanessa in the hospital bed. Me standing between them like a boundary, and neither dared to cross. It seems we have quite a situation here. Indeed we do. Detective... I agreed, my voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions churning beneath the surface. And I'm ready to provide you with everything I know. The evidence room at the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department's Central Precinct smelled of dust and institutional disinfectant. Detective Morales spread the contents of a cardboard box across the metal table. Plastic evidence bags containing vials, notebooks, and printed emails that mapped out months of calculated poisoning attempts against me. The search of your husband's home office and vehicle was quite illuminating. Mrs. Thornfield. She noted arranging the items in chronological order. These journals detail symptom progression, dosage adjustments, and even theories about your physical tolerance levels. She pushed a leather-bound notebook toward me, its pages filled with Marcus's precise architectural handwriting. I stared at the clinical notations, my stomach churning, at the methodical way my suffering had been documented. May 15, 5 meal coolers administered via morning coffee. Subject experienced nausea and dizziness within 30 minutes. Symptoms persisted approximately 6 hours. Missed client meeting as intended. Dosage appears effective, but duration insufficient for desired outcome. May 28th, increased to 5 millimoles in evening meal. Subject experienced more severe symptoms plus apparent memory issues. The following day, recovery time extended to 12+ hours. Note, potential for building tolerance suggests need for rotation between substances. He writes about me like I'm a laboratory experiment. I whispered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Were there others before me? Detective Morales' expression softened slightly. We're investigating that possibility. Your sister-in-law's financial records show payments to 2 former assistants who became ill while working for her. They left the company before any formal complaints were filed. 2 weeks had passed since that fateful brunch at Vanessa's house. In that time, my world had been systematically dismantled and examined piece by piece. Our shared finances, our professional connections, our social circle all revealed to have been carefully manipulated by Marcus and Vanessa. What I still don't understand, I said, pushing the notebook away, unable to bear reading more of my husband's clinical observations of my suffering, is when this began. When did I stop being his wife and start being an obstacle? Detective Morales consulted another file. Based on electronic communications we've recovered, it appears to have begun approximately 8 months ago, shortly after you secured the Westbrook account. She handed me a printed email exchange between Marcus and Vanessa. From the Thornfield Design Com. To Marcus Thornfield, I Thornark Com. Subject problem. She's become a liability. Westbrook was mine. I've been cultivating that relationship for 3 years, and suddenly, your darling wife swoops in and takes it. Now I'm hearing rumors Goldstein is considering her firm too. This can't continue. We need to discuss options, preferably ones that don't leave us exposed to scrutiny. Remember what we discussed about her health? Time to put that in motion. From Marcus Thornfield, I Thornark Com. To VT I Thornfield Design Com. Subject re-problem. Let's not overreact. Perhaps a more subtle approach. First, I could suggest she scale back her workload. Focus on existing clients rather than acquisition. She trusts me completely. It wouldn't be difficult to convince her it's for her own good. If that fails, I know someone through the university research program who might help with our alternative solution. But that's last resort. The words blurred before my eyes as tears threatened. I blinked them back, refusing to break down in the sterile evidence room. They were plotting this even then. I said flatly, while he was bringing me soup when I had the flu and planning our anniversary trip to Quebec. People compartmentalize. Detective Morales observed, your husband appears to have been particularly skilled at it. She gathered the materials back into their evidence bags. The district attorney believes we have sufficient evidence for attempted murder charges against both of them. With the documentation they kept and the substances recovered, combined with your medical records, conviction is highly likely. I nodded, trying to focus on the facts rather than the emotional devastation. And the restraining orders. In place for both of them, neither can come within 500 feet of you. Your home or your workplace. Mr. Thornfield has been released on bail but is wearing an ankle monitor. Ms. Thornfield remains hospitalized under guard due to complications from the substance she ingested. There was a certain poetic justice in that, though I took no pleasure in it. What happens now? I asked, gathering my coat and purse, eager to escape the clinical cataloging of my husband's betrayal. Detective Morales walked me toward the exit. "Now you focus on healing and rebuilding. The case is solid. Let us handle the justice part." At the door, she paused. "Mrs. Thornfield, Elise, for what it's worth, your presence of mind that morning likely saved your life. The toxicology report on that coffee showed levels that would have caused severe organ damage, possibly death. Outside the police station, spring sunshine bathed the city in deceptive warmth. Nashville continued its business around me. Tourists exploring Broadway, locals rushing to meetings life, proceeding with normal rhythms while mine remained fractured. I checked my phone to find 3 messages from my assistant regarding the Goldstein presentation scheduled for the following week. Work at least remained a constant. I'd throw myself into the presentation prove that neither Marcius nor Vanessa had succeeded in derailing my career. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point for rebuilding. One step, then another. First the presentation, then finding a new place to live that didn't echo with memories of betrayal. As I walked toward the parking garage, I noticed a familiar figure leaning against a column near my car. Vanessa's former assistant, Layla Davies. We'd met briefly at company events, though I'd always sensed her discomfort around Vanessa. When she'd left the firm abruptly last year citing health reasons, I'd sent a polite but distant get-well card, unaware of the significance. "Mrs. Thornfield." She called, straightening as I approached. "I'm sorry to ambush you like this, but I heard about what happened. The detective contacted me." Her hands twisted nervously around the strap of her messenger bag. "I should have said something when I left Thornfield Design. Maybe if I had, you wouldn't have gone through the same thing." I finished for her. The realization that I wasn't their first victim, just their most ambitious target, settled heavily in my chest. Layla nodded, her eyes haunted. They were subtle at first food that made me sick before important client meetings. Coffee that left me disoriented. I thought I was just run down, stressed. Then it got worse. She pushed up her sleeve to reveal a patchwork of scars along her forearm. I had an allergic reaction so severe, it left permanent damage. That's when I quit, but I was too scared to file a report. Vanessa made it clear she'd ruin my career if I said anything. "But you're talking now," I observed, unlocking my car with the key fob. "Because you had the courage to stand up to them, and because Detective Morales showed me the journals. My name is in them too. They were practicing on me figuring out dosages." She shuddered. "I want to testify. I want to help make sure they can't do this to anyone else." I studied her for a moment, recognizing the same determination that had helped me survive. "Have you had lunch? We could talk more about this. Somewhere that doesn't smell like exhaust fumes." Layla's relief was palpable. "I'd like that." As we drove toward a quiet cafe in East Nashville, I realized this was the first step in a new direction. Not just surviving what Marcus and Vanessa had done, but building something positive from the wreckage. Information shared between victims might help protect others, might help the prosecution build an even stronger case. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned when I'd met the charming architect with the winning smile 3 years ago. But it was the life I had now, and I would make it count. The courtroom was unnaturally quiet as the bailiff called for all to rise. Judge Eleanor Harmon entered her black robes, flowing behind her like a shadow, as she took her seat at the bench. The 3-week trial had been a media sensation in Nashville. The successful executive, the prominent architect, and the influential interior designer entangled in a poisoning plot that read like a psychological thriller. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution table dressed in a conservative navy suit that projected strength rather than victimhood. Beside me sat Layla Davies and Caroline Winters, another former assistant of Vanessa's, who had come forward after the story broke, both women providing crucial testimony about their own experiences that established a pattern of behavior. Across the aisle, Marcus's parents stared straight ahead, their faces masks of shock and disbelief. They had retreated into stunned silence when the evidence was presented, unable to reconcile the son they raised with the methodical poisoner. Revealed in court, Vanessa and Marcus sat at the defense table, both in expensively tailored outfits that couldn't quite conceal how the past months had diminished them. "Will the defendants please rise?" Judge Harmon instructed, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. Marcus stood first, then Vanessa, who still moved with some difficulty, a lasting effect of having ingested the substance meant for me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that she would carry the physical consequences of their plot for the rest of her life. Marcus Andrew Thornfield and Vanessa Elizabeth Thornfield, you have been found guilty of attempted murder in the first-degree conspiracy to commit bodily harm and multiple counts of assault with a toxic substance. Judge Harmon's gaze moved between the siblings. The evidence presented in this trial reveals a disturbing pattern of calculated behavior, motivated by professional jealousy and an utter disregard for human life. She paused, allowing her words to settle over the courtroom. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the intimate nature of the betrayal. Mr. Thornfield, you systematically poisoned your own wife, a woman who trusted you completely. At the behest of your sister, you kept meticulous records of her suffering, as if she were nothing more than a laboratory specimen. Marcus's shoulders slumped visibly. For the first time since his arrest, he seemed to fully comprehend the magnitude of his actions. Mrs. Thornfield. The judge continued, turning her attention to Vanessa. The court has reviewed your psychiatric evaluation and rejects the assertion that your competitive nature somehow mitigates your responsibility. Your calculated escalation of dosages, particularly after witnessing the physical suffering of your victims, demonstrates a disturbing lack of empathy and basic human decency. Vanessa remained rigid, her perfect posture a last vestige of the control she once wielded so effectively. The premeditated nature of these actions carried out against family members and employees over an extended period demands the maximum sentence under Tennessee law. Judge Harmon's voice was firm, brooking no argument. Marcus Andrew Thornfield, this court sentences you to 25 years in state prison. Vanessa Elizabeth Thornfield, this court sentences you to 23 years in state prison. You will both be required to make restitution to your victims in amounts to be determined at a separate hearing. The gavel struck with finality, and court officers moved forward to take them into custody. Marcus turned toward me, his eyes seeking mine one last time. What was he looking for? Forgiveness? Understanding? I met his gaze, steadily offering neither. After a moment, he turned away, allowing himself to be led from the courtroom, in handcuffs, Vanessa following behind. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered on the steps, cameras flashing as I emerged with my attorney, Gregory Patel. Mrs. Thornfield, how do you feel about the verdict? A reporter thrust a microphone toward me. Justice has been served. I stated simply, now I intend to focus on rebuilding my life and my career. Will you continue working in Nashville, given the connections your former in-laws still have in the business community? The question gave me pause. I hadn't considered leaving until that moment, but the thought took root immediately. Perhaps a fresh start somewhere else would be the healthiest choice. I haven't made any decisions about the future yet. I replied diplomatically. For now, I'm grateful to the prosecution team, Detective Morales, and the medical professionals whose expertise helped bring this case to its appropriate conclusion. As the press conference concluded, Gregory touched my elbow lightly. "There's someone who'd like to speak with you privately," he murmured, nodding toward a distinguished older man waiting by a town car at the curb. Robert Goldstein, the CEO of Goldstein International, whose account had been at the center of the conflict between Vanessa and me, approached as the reporters dispersed. "Mrs. Thornfield." He greeted me, extending his hand. "I wanted to personally express how disturbed I was to learn what you endured. The presentation you delivered for us last month, knowing now what you were dealing with behind the scenes, was nothing short of remarkable. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. I pride myself on professionalism regardless of personal circumstances." I shook his hand firmly. "Indeed, that quality is precisely why I've come today with an offer. Our West Coast operations are expanding, and we're establishing a new headquarters in San Francisco. We need someone with your vision and resilience to head our marketing division there." He handed me an envelope. "All the details are inside. It would mean relocation, of course, but perhaps a fresh start would be welcome after recent events." The opportunity was unexpected but perfectly timed a chance to rebuild, far from the whispers and sidelong glances that would inevitably follow me in Nashville, no matter how successful the prosecution had been. "I'm honored by your confidence, Mr. Goldstein. I'll review your proposal and be in touch very soon." As his car pulled away from the curb, I stood on the courthouse steps feeling the weight of possibilities before me. The city stretched out beyond familiar, yet forever changed by what had transpired within its borders. Perhaps it was time to leave it behind, to find new horizons, where my name wasn't associated with sensational headlines and betrayal. Gregory cleared his throat beside me. "Whatever you decide about San Francisco, the civil suit against Thornfield Design is still proceeding. The value of the company has plummeted since the arrests, but there are substantial assets to be claimed as compensation. Use whatever we recover to establish a foundation." I decided immediately, something to help victims of domestic abuse and workplace harassment. Something positive needs to come from all this. Later that evening, as sunset painted Nashville's skyline in hues of amber and gold, I stood in the apartment I'd rented after moving out of the home I'd shared with Marcus. Boxes were stacked against the walls I'd never fully unpacked, as if some part of me had known this was merely a transitional space. Now, with the Goldstein offer in hand, I allowed myself to imagine a different life on the opposite coast, one where no one knew my history, where I could define myself by my future rather than by what had been done to me. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Mr. Goldstein, accepting his offer, feeling the first genuine stirrings of hope in months. The trial was over. Justice had been served, and now it was time to write the next chapter. One where I was the author of my own story, not a character in someone else's twisted plot. 1 year later, fog rolled in from San Francisco Bay, wreathing the Golden Gate Bridge in diaphanous gray, as I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Pacific Heights apartment. The city below was still waking up, lights twinkling through the mist like earthbound stars. In the distance, a foghorn sounded a mournful note that no longer struck me as melancholy, but rather as a reminder that even in obscured visibility, there were systems in place to guide safely home those who ventured out. My phone chimed with a calendar notification. Keynote speech, Women in Business Conference, 10 a.m. I smiled at the timing 1 year to the day since I'd left Nashville behind, exchanging the familiar rolling hills of Tennessee for the dramatic topography of Northern California. 1 year of rebuilding of therapy sessions where I gradually unpacked the trauma of betrayal, of establishing new routines and connections in this city of perpetual reinvention. The transition hadn't been seamless. There were nights when I jolted awake, heart racing, convinced I could taste metal in my mouth. Mornings when I'd stared at my coffee cup, unable to bring it to my lips without first taking a cautious sniff. But those moments had grown progressively rarer as weeks turned to months, as new memories began to overlay the painful ones. The Thornfield Foundation for Survivors of Domestic Manipulation had launched 6 months ago, funded by the proceeds from the civil suit against Thornfield Design. Layla Davies served as its executive director, channeling her own painful experience into creating resources for others. We'd already helped 27 individuals escape situations where psychological manipulation and covert poisoning were being used as control mechanisms, a disturbingly more common scenario than either of us had initially realized. My phone rang, displaying Gregory Patel's name. I answered, putting it on speaker as I continued preparing for the day. "Good morning, Greg. You're up early in Nashville." "Important news." He replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. The appeals court unanimously rejected both cases. The convictions stand. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Marcus and Vanessa had filed separate appeals, each attempting to shift greater blame to the other, each claiming inadequate representation during the original trial. That's the end of it then, barring some extraordinary circumstance. Yes, they've exhausted their options. Marcus will be eligible for parole in 15 years, Vanessa in 14, due to her ongoing medical issues. He paused. "Are you ready for your speech today?" I glanced at the printed notes on my desk, the carefully crafted address that balanced professional insights with just enough of my personal story to make an impact without turning me into a perpetual victim in people's eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be. Goldstein is introducing me himself. You've done remarkable work for them this year. The West Coast Division's growth under your leadership has been impressive. It's amazing what one can accomplish when not being systematically poisoned." I replied dryly, earning a chuckle from Gregory. "True enough. Break a leg today. Elise, I'll be thinking of you." After ending the call, I finished dressing, selecting a tailored crimson suit that projected confidence and authority. The woman who gazed back at me from the mirror bore little resemblance to the shell-shocked survivor who had sat in that Nashville courtroom a year ago. My eyes were clear, my posture straight, my expression composed but no longer guarded. I'd learned to trust again, selectively, cautiously but authentically. The conference venue overlooked the bay, its modern glass architecture capturing the essence of innovation that permeated San Francisco's business culture. As I took my place on the stage, facing an audience of nearly 400 women in various stages of their professional journeys, I felt a surreal sense of having come full circle. This was what Marcus and Vanessa had tried to prevent. My voice being heard, my influence expanding, my success eclipsing theirs. "Good morning." I began, my voice carrying clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "My name is Elise Morgan, and I'm here today to talk about resilience in business and in life." I'd reclaimed my maiden name after the divorce, another step in reconstructing my identity. The audience settled in, notebooks open, attentive faces turned toward me with expectation. Resilience isn't just about weathering storms. It's about recognizing when the weather itself is being manipulated. A ripple of interest moved through the crowd at this unexpected opening. A year ago, I discovered that my husband and sister-in-law had been systematically poisoning me to sabotage my professional success. The room grew still, the typical rustling and shifting of a large audience fading to absolute silence. I could stand here and tell you every harrowing detail of that experience. I could catalog the betrayals, the gaslighting, the physical suffering. But that would center them in my story, and they no longer deserve that place. I paused, letting the words settle. Instead, I want to talk about the aftermath, about how we rebuild when trust is shattered, about how we transform trauma into purpose, about how we turn survival into triumph. For the next 40 minutes, I wove together business principles and personal insights, offering concrete strategies for navigating professional setbacks and personal crises with equal resilience. I spoke about the foundation, about the importance of creating safety nets for others, even as we heal ourselves, about the power of redirecting pain toward constructive change. The most valuable lesson I've learned, I concluded, is that resilience isn't about returning to who you were before the crisis. It's about becoming someone new, someone stronger, wiser, and more intentional about every aspect of life. Someone who understands that success isn't measured by a single achievement or position, but by the impact we have on others and the integrity with which we live each day. The applause that followed was thunderous, the standing ovation, a validation not just of my words, but of the journey they represented. As I stepped away from the podium, Robert Goldstein approached, extending his hand in congratulations. Remarkable address, Elise. You've given them something genuinely valuable today. Thank you for taking a chance on me last year. I replied, not every CEO would have offered a high-profile position to someone whose name was making national headlines for all the wrong reasons. I recognized resilience when I saw it. He said simply, the board has approved your proposal for the new creative division. By the way, you'll have full autonomy to build your team. As we walked together toward the networking reception, a young woman approached, her expression earnest. Mrs. Morgan, your speech was so powerful. I'm currently in a situation with some similarities to what you described. Could I possibly speak with you or someone from your foundation? Absolutely, I replied, reaching into my pocket for a business card. Call this number this afternoon. Someone will help you immediately. She took the card with trembling fingers, relief evident in her posture. Thank you. I wasn't sure who to turn to. Watching her walk away, I felt the familiar mix of sadness and purpose that such encounters always evoked. The world was full of people trapped in relationships where trust had become a weapon used against them, where love had twisted into control, where intimacy provided the perfect cover for harm. But it was also full of survivors finding their way forward, of communities willing to believe and support them, of second chances and new beginnings. My own journey from victim to advocate was just one thread in that larger tapestry of human resilience. Later that evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the last light fade from the sky, I thought about how far I'd come since that morning at Vanessa's dining table when I'd switched our coffee cups. One split-second decision born from months of mounting suspicion and self-preservation had altered the course of countless lives. Mine most dramatically, but also those of everyone connected to the Thornfield siblings, and now those being helped by the foundation. My phone chimed with a message from Layla. Just met with the woman from your conference. Getting her to safe housing tonight. Thank you for sending her our way. I typed back quickly. Thank you for being there for her. Let me know if she needs anything else. Setting down the phone. I lifted my wine glass in a silent toast to the future. Not just mine, but that young woman's as well. We were both works in progress, navigating paths neither of us had chosen, but finding our way nonetheless. The fog had cleared, revealing a sky scattered with stars above the glittering city lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to transform the painful lessons of the past into something meaningful. For now, though, I allowed myself to simply appreciate the moment, the cool evening air, the distant sounds of the city, the knowledge that I had survived not just to exist, but to thrive. I was no longer the woman who feared her own husband, who second-guessed her perceptions, who apologized for her successes. That version of me had been left behind in Nashville, along with the coffee cup I never drank from, and the life I never truly had. In her place stood someone stronger, someone wiser, someone determined to ensure that what happened to her would help others find their way out of the darkness. Not just surviving, but reclaiming the right to live without fear, to trust again, to build something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. That perhaps was the greatest revenge of all. You're absolutely right. The current version doesn't reach the 12,000-word count requested. Let me continue the narrative to fulfill that requirement while maintaining the quality of the storytelling. The Cup of Deception continued. The aftermath and revelations. 6 months after my keynote address at the Women in Business conference, I found myself standing in the lobby of the Montgomery Building home to the newly established headquarters of the Thornfield Foundation. What had begun as a modest initiative, funded by the proceeds of my civil suit against Thornfield Design, had blossomed into something far more impactful than I'd initially envisioned. "Mrs. Morgan, your 2 o'clock is here," announced Devon, our receptionist, gesturing toward a woman seated in one of the ergonomic chairs that dotted our waiting area. Dr. Weintraub from UCSF Medical Center. I smiled in acknowledgement and approached the visitor. Dr. Amelia Weintraub rose to meet me, a tall woman in her mid-50s with salt and pepper hair, cropped in a practical bob, and intelligent eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. Her reputation as one of the country's foremost toxicologists preceded her. "Dr. Weintraub, thank you for coming." I extended my hand, which she shook with firm confidence. "Please follow me to my office." As we walked through the open concept work area, staff members glanced up from their desks with respectful nods. What had begun with just Layla and me now comprised a team of 15 dedicated professionals. Counselors, legal advocates, and researchers all committed to addressing the surprisingly prevalent issue of intimate poisoning. "Impressive operation," Dr. Weintraub commented as we entered my corner office overlooking the bay. "You've accomplished a remarkable amount in a short time." "Necessity driving invention," I replied, gesturing for her to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs arranged around a small conference table, rather than across from my desk. It was a deliberate choice. I preferred collaboration to hierarchy whenever possible. We've identified over 70 cases nationwide in just the past year. Most victims remain unaware of what's happening to them until the damage becomes severe. Dr. Weintraub nodded gravely, "Which is precisely why I reached out to you. My research team has been developing a screening protocol we believe could help emergency departments identify potential cases earlier." She removed a tablet from her briefcase and swiped through several slides. We've isolated biomarkers for 12 of the most commonly used substances in these cases. The test is non-invasive, and results are available within hours rather than days. I leaned forward, studying the data on her screen, and it can distinguish between accidental exposure and intentional poisoning. In most cases, yes, the pattern of metabolites is different with sustained low-dose exposure versus a single accidental ingestion. She paused, her expression softening slightly. Your case actually helped inform our research. The medical records you provided with identifiers removed, of course, gave us valuable insights into how these substances manifest over time. A familiar chill ran through me at the reminder of those months of unexplained illness, of Marcus's concerned facade. As he documented my suffering in his meticulous journal, I pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the potential this research held for others. What do you need from us to help implement this protocol? Dr. Weintraub smiled. Direct and to the point, I appreciate that. She outlined her proposal, a partnership between the Foundation and UCSF to pilot the screening protocol in emergency departments across 5 major cities. Your Foundation's connections with victim advocacy groups would be invaluable in identifying cases for follow-up, providing support services, and helping us refine the approach. By the time Devon knocked on my door to announce my next appointment, Dr. Weintraub and I had sketched the framework for a collaboration that could potentially save countless lives. As I walked her to the elevator, she hesitated before stepping inside. Ms. Morgan Elise. I rarely say this to potential research partners, but I feel compelled in this case. Her expression was earnest professional distance, momentarily set aside. What happened to you was unconscionable. But the work you're doing now will change the landscape for victims of this particular form of abuse. It matters. After she departed, I returned to my office and stood at the window, gazing out at the fog rolling in beneath the Golden Gate Bridge. Dr. Weintraub's words echoed in my mind. It matters. In the darkest days following Marcus's arrest, when reporters camped outside my Nashville apartment and colleagues avoided eye contact in elevators, I'd questioned whether anything would ever matter again. Whether I could reassemble the shattered pieces of my life into something meaningful. The ringing of my phone interrupted my reflection. The number displayed wasn't one I recognized, but I answered anyway, a habit I'd developed since establishing the Foundation. Many calls came from those in desperate situations who had found our contact information through support groups or online resources. Elise Morgan speaking. Ms. Morgan. A male voice, hesitant and vaguely familiar. This is Edward Thornfield, Marcus, and Vanessa's father. My breath caught. I hadn't spoken to my former in-laws since the trial, where they had sat rigidly in the courtroom, faces frozen in disbelief as the evidence of their children's crimes accumulated day after day. Mr. Thornfield. I managed my voice carefully. Neutral. This is unexpected. I imagine so. His voice carried the weight of the 18 months that had passed since his children's sentencing. Once commanding and confident, it now sounded aged beyond its years. I'm in San Francisco. I was hoping we might meet. My instinct was to refuse immediately. What could possibly be gained from revisiting that chapter of my life? Yet curiosity, perhaps morbid, perhaps healing, pulled at me. May I ask why? A heavy sigh traveled across the connection. There are things you should know. Things we discovered after everything came to light. About Marcus and Vanessa. About their childhood. It doesn't excuse what they did to you. Nothing could. But it might help you understand. Understanding had never been my priority. Survival justice rebuilding these had consumed my focus, yet something in his tone gave me pause. "There's a cafe on Fillmore Street called Sage Tomorrow at 11. I suggested, surprising myself. "Thank you," he replied, relief evident in his voice. "I'll be there." After ending the call, I sat at my desk wondering if I'd made a mistake. Edward Thornfield had never been unkind to me, but he had raised the two people who had systematically attempted to destroy me. What revelations could he possibly offer that would matter now? I dialed Layla's extension. "Are you free for dinner tonight? Something's come up I'd like to discuss." The restaurant Layla had chosen overlooked the marina, its windows framing the forest of sailboat masts that bobbed gently in the evening breeze. We had settled into a comfortable friendship over the past year, bound by our shared experience as Vanessa's targets and our commitment to helping others escape similar situations. "Edward Thornfield," she repeated after I recounted the unexpected call. "I only met him once at that Christmas party before everything fell apart. He seemed distant, like he was physically present but mentally elsewhere." I nodded, remembering my own impressions of my former father-in-law. "He was always cordial but never warm. Marcus said he had been that way since their mother died when they were teenagers." Layla twirled her wineglass thoughtfully. "Are you sure meeting him is wise? You've worked so hard to move forward." "That's precisely why I'm considering it," I replied, surprising myself with the realization. Moving forward doesn't necessarily mean never looking back. If there's something to be learned that could help our work with the Foundation, or even just provide closure. You don't need closure from them. "Elise," Layla said gently, "you've built something extraordinary from that trauma. Whatever he wants to tell you, make sure it's for your benefit, not to ease his conscience." Her words stayed with me through the night and into the morning. As I prepared for the meeting, I chose my outfit deliberately. A structured blazer over a simple blouse and tailored pants. Professional, rather than personal. This wasn't a reunion. It was an information exchange. Sage Cafe occupied a corner location in one of San Francisco's most picturesque neighborhoods, its interior warm with natural woods and abundant greenery. I arrived 10 minutes early, selecting a table in the back that afforded privacy while maintaining a clear view of both exits, a habit I'd developed during the trial when media interest had been at its peak. Edward Thornfield arrived precisely at 11. His tall frame stooped slightly as he entered. Once a distinguished-looking man with the same architectural precision in his appearance that Marcus had inherited, he now looked diminished. His trademark silver hair had thinned, and deep lines bracketed his mouth. He scanned the cafe until our eyes met, and I raised my hand in a minimal gesture of acknowledgement. "Elise," he said as he approached, hesitating before taking the seat opposite me. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Mr. Thornfield," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Edward, please, I think we're well past formalities." He placed a leather portfolio on the table between us, his hands trembling slightly. "You look well. California agrees with you. Being free of people who were poisoning me agrees with me." I countered, unwilling to exchange pleasantries, as if we were distant acquaintances, reuniting by chance. He flinched but nodded. "Directness was always one of your strengths. I admired that about you, even when it made Vanessa uncomfortable." He paused as a server approached to take our orders. Herbal tea for me, black coffee for him. When we were alone again, he continued. "After the trial, after everything came to light, I couldn't understand how my children could have become what they became. I hired a private investigator to look into certain aspects of our family history. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. What purpose would that serve? I needed to know if I had missed signs. If there had been indications of disturbing behavior earlier. His hands fidgeted with the portfolio but didn't open it. What the investigator found was unexpected medical records primarily, but also school incident reports I was never made aware of. The server returned with our beverages. I waited until she had departed before prompting, "What kind of records?" Edward took a deep breath. "Margaret, my wife died when the children were 16 and 14, Vanessa and Marcus respectively. The official cause was complications from pneumonia, but the investigator discovered discrepancies in her medical history. Recurring hospitalizations, with symptoms remarkably similar to what you experienced." My fingers tightened around my teacup. "Are you suggesting what I think you are?" The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Vanessa was a chemistry prodigy. Her teachers noted both her exceptional talent and concerning interests. There were incidents at school, other students becoming ill after accepting food from her, particularly rivals for academic honors or social attention. And you had no idea. I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. I was largely absent during their adolescence. Edward admitted shame evident in his posture. My architectural firm was expanding internationally. I was in Dubai, Shanghai, London, while they were home with their mother and a rotating staff of housekeepers. He opened the portfolio at last, removing several photocopied documents, which he slid across the table. This is Vanessa's journal from when she was 15. The housekeeper found it concerning enough to make copies, but was fired before she could bring it to my attention. I hesitated before taking the pages, unsure whether I wanted this window into the mind that had orchestrated my suffering. Curiosity won out. The handwriting was unmistakably a younger version of Vanessa's elegant script, the content chilling in its clinical detachment. Experiment 12. M's headaches, responding well to gradual administration. Mother's migraine medication produces desired disorientation when delivered in morning tea. Subject has difficulty concentrating during school hours, resulting in academic performance decline, as intended. Performance anxiety increasing with each poor result. Secondary psychological effect noted and appreciated. Note: M still unaware of cause. Attribute symptoms to stress. Perfect. More I questioned, though I already suspected the answer. Marcus, her own brother. Edward's voice cracked. She was experimenting on him first, ensuring his grades fell below hers. When the investigator interviewed their former classmates, several recalled Marcus suddenly, struggling academically. During their sophomore year, going from top mathematics student to barely passing, I continued reading, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach as I encountered entries about mother's mysterious symptoms and testing tolerance levels. The teenage Vanessa had detailed her observations with the same clinical precision that Marcus had later used in documenting my symptoms. When did it shift from Vanessa acting alone to them working together? I asked, unable to reconcile the victimized teenage Marcus with the man who had methodically poisoned me at his sister's behest. Edward removed another document from the portfolio, a psychological evaluation of Marcus conducted while he was in custody, awaiting trial. The forensic psychologist described it as a complex case of trauma bonding and psychological manipulation. Vanessa convinced Marcus that their mother's death was his fault, that his emotional neediness had exacerbated her condition. She positioned herself as his protector, the only one who understood and forgave him. Stockholm Syndrome. I murmured, thinking of the codependent relationship I'd observed between the siblings. How Marcus had always deferred to Vanessa's judgment despite being successful in his own right. Essentially, yes. By the time you met him, he'd spent over a decade under her influence, believing himself responsible for their mother's death, believing Vanessa was the only one who could keep his destructive tendencies in check. Edward's expression was haunted. The psychologist believes Vanessa convinced Marcus that helping her poison you was atonement for what happened to their mother. I set down the journal pages, unable to read more. Why are you telling me this now? What purpose does it serve? Because you deserve to know the full truth. Because the foundation you've established might help identify other cases like this before they escalate. And because... He hesitated, then reached for another document in the portfolio. Because Vanessa has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Pancreatic stage 4. The prison doctors estimate she has 3 to 6 months. The news landed like a physical blow, unexpected and disorienting. I had imagined Vanessa serving her full sentence, had pictured her aging behind bars as I built my new life. The thought of her dying so soon after being held accountable felt strangely hollow. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said automatically, the social nicety ingrained despite everything. "She's asking to see you." Edward said quietly, "She claims there are things she needs to tell you before she dies. Things even Marcus doesn't know." The cafe seemed suddenly too warm, too confining. The idea of facing Vanessa again, of subjecting myself to whatever manipulation she might attempt, even as she faced death, was unthinkable. "Absolutely not," I replied, my voice firm. "I understand completely," Edward assured me. "I wouldn't have mentioned it except that she's been writing what amounts to a confession. Details about other victims, about situations we may not be aware of. The prison psychologist believes it's genuine, possibly driven by the recognition that she's run out of time." I thought of the foundation of Dr. Weintraub's research, of the potential value in understanding the full extent of Vanessa's actions. I won't see her, but I would review whatever documentation she provides, particularly if it helps identify other victims who might need support. Edward nodded, relief evident in his expression. "That's more than generous, given the circumstances." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, and I know it's worth very little, I am profoundly sorry for what my children did to you, for the role my absence may have played in shaping who they became. Not a day passes that I don't wonder if I could have prevented it all by simply being present." The rawness of his regret was palpable, his formerly commanding presence, reduced to that of a broken man confronting the wreckage of his family legacy. I felt an unexpected surge of pity. "We can't change the past," I said, echoing words my therapist had repeated often during our sessions. "All we can do is try to create meaning from it moving forward." I gathered my belongings, preparing to leave. Have Vanessa's documentation sent to the foundation. We'll review it for actionable information. As I stood, Edward reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "One more thing. This was recovered from the safe deposit box Marcus maintained separately from Vanessa. I believe it belongs to you." He placed the box on the table between us. With reluctant curiosity, I opened it to find my grandmother's sapphire ring, a family heirloom I'd thought lost during the chaos of the investigation and my hasty departure from Nashville. Seeing it again was like encountering a ghost, a relic from a life that no longer felt like my own. "Thank you," I said, closing the box and slipping it into my purse. It was my grandmother's. I'd resigned myself to never seeing it again. Marcus kept it separate from everything else. Edward noted. The investigators believed it was the one thing he couldn't bring himself to surrender to Vanessa's influence. I wasn't sure what to make of that information, whether it represented some small fragment of genuine feeling in an otherwise monstrous deception or simply another layer of manipulation. Either way, it changed nothing about what had happened. "Goodbye, Edward," I said, extending my hand formally. "I hope you find some peace." His grip was firm, despite the visible tremor in his fingers. "The same to you, Elise. Though it seems you're already well on your way." As I left the cafe and walked down Fillmore Street toward my parked car, I felt an unexpected lightness. The meeting hadn't provided closure in the traditional sense, but it had offered a wider perspective on the twisted family dynamic that had nearly destroyed me. Knowledge, even painful knowledge, was preferable to uncertainty. My phone buzzed with a text from Layla. "Everything okay?" I typed back quickly. "Yes. Heading to the office now. Lots to tell you." The Foundation awaited with its mission more vital than ever. Edward's revelations about Vanessa's childhood experiments only underscored how early these patterns could begin, how crucial early intervention might be. Perhaps Dr. Weintraub's screening protocol could be adapted for pediatric cases as well. As I navigated San Francisco's hills toward our office, I realized I no longer thought of myself primarily as a survivor of what Marcus and Vanessa had done. That experience had shaped me, certainly, but it no longer defined me. I was defined instead by what I had built from its ashes, a new career, a foundation helping others' relationships based on genuine trust rather than manipulation. The sapphire ring sat in my purse, a tangible reminder of the past. But unlike before, it now felt like just that, the past. A chapter concluded rather than an open wound. Whatever Vanessa's final confession might reveal, whatever new challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. Not as a victim, but as the architect of my own recovery. Vanessa's legacy. 3 weeks after my meeting with Edward Thornfield, a substantial package arrived at the Foundation offices. The prison warden had forwarded Vanessa's documentation as promised. 3 notebooks filled with her precise handwriting, accompanied by a USB drive containing scanned documents dating back to her teenage years. Layla and I sat in the Foundation's conference room, the materials spread across the table between us like evidence from a crime scene, which in many ways they were. Dr. Weintraub had joined us via video conference, her expertise invaluable in interpreting the detailed chemical annotations that peppered Vanessa's accounts. "The level of documentation is extraordinary," Dr. Weintraub commented, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the digital files we'd shared on screen. "Most perpetrators don't keep such meticulous records of their actions." Vanessa saw herself as a researcher. I replied, turning a page in the most recent notebook. In her mind, these weren't crimes, but experiments, data points. The notebooks chronicled 37 cases beyond those we'd already been aware of, startling evidence that Vanessa's activities had extended far beyond family and close associates, colleagues who had competed with her for promotions, neighbors who had slighted her at community events, even a barista who had spelled her name wrong repeatedly and consequently suffered months of corrective consequences. When Vanessa began bringing him homemade cookies as supposed apologies, "There's a pattern to her escalation," Layla observed, arranging the cases chronologically. She started with subtle interventions, mild symptoms, temporary discomfort, but over time, particularly in the last 5 years before her arrest, the effects became increasingly severe. Dr. Weintraub nodded. The compounds she was using evolved as well. Early cases involved easily accessed substances, excessive amounts of certain spices, over-the-counter medications in controlled doses. Later, she began synthesizing her own compounds or accessing pharmaceutical-grade materials through Marcus's university connections. I turned to the final pages of the most recent notebook, where Vanessa had written what amounted to a manifesto explaining her actions. Her handwriting remained perfectly controlled, despite her declining health, the words chilling in their clarity. I recognize now what others would call my compulsion. From my earliest memories, I understood that control was the only certain protection in an uncertain world. My father's frequent absences, my mother's emotional instability, Marcus's neediness all represented chaos that required management. My first experiment was innocent enough observing how different foods affected my brother's mood and energy levels. When I discovered that certain combinations made him too tired to demand attention, too nauseous to accompany our mother on outings, I felt a sense of power that became addictive. By the time I realized controlling people through biochemical means had become my primary coping mechanism, I couldn't stop. Each successful intervention reinforced my sense of superiority, my belief that I alone had discovered the perfect method for navigating an inherently competitive world. Elise represented the ultimate threat, someone whose success seemed effortless, whose confidence wasn't manufactured like mine, whose presence in our family disrupted the careful balance I had maintained with Marcus. The fact that she began to suspect, began to protect herself, only intensified my determination to regain control. The final paragraph struck me with particular force. I do not seek forgiveness. Such a concept holds no meaning for me. But I offer this record in the clinical spirit with which it was created as data for those who study such phenomena, as a warning to those who might recognize similar patterns in themselves or others, and as a final experiment in whether truth delivered too late has any value at all. Classic psychopathic presentation. Dr. Weintraub commented after I read the passage aloud. Complete absence of remorse. Intellectual understanding of social norms without emotional connection to them. Perception of others as objects to be manipulated rather than autonomous beings. The question is, what do we do with all this? Layla gestured to the materials spread before us. There are names, dates, specific incidents spanning decades. Some of these people may have no idea what happened to them. I closed the notebook, my decision already forming. We create a protocol for the victims we can identify and locate. We offer testing to confirm exposure and support services if they choose to engage. For those who've moved on or might not want to know, we respect that boundary. And the broader implications. Dr. Weintraub asked, this documentation could significantly advance our understanding of how these cases develop and progress. The research applications are substantial. We'll anonymize everything and make it available to qualified researchers like yourself. I decided, but our primary responsibility is to the people Vanessa harmed. Their well-being comes first. Over the next month, we developed what came to be known as the Thornfield Protocol, a comprehensive approach to identifying, notifying, and supporting victims of sustained covert poisoning. The Foundation established partnerships with medical facilities across the country, training staff to recognize potential cases and implement Dr. Weintraub's screening tests. Edward Thornfield, upon learning of our efforts, established a substantial trust to fund the program's expansion, converting a significant portion of his wealth into resources for those his daughter had harmed. It wouldn't erase the damage done, but it represented a tangible commitment to repair. As for Vanessa herself, she declined more rapidly than the prison doctors had anticipated. 4 months after sending her documentation to the Foundation, she died in the prison infirmary. Marcus at her bedside, under special dispensation due to the circumstances. I learned of her death through a brief email from Edward. Elise. Vanessa passed last night at 11:47 p.m. The end was peaceful according to the medical staff. Marcus has been returned to his facility. I thought you should know. The trust documents for the Foundation have been finalized. My attorney will be in touch. Edward! I read the message in my office, surprised by my own emotional response. Not grief, certainly, but a complex mixture of relief, finality, and something approaching pity for a woman whose brilliance had been corrupted by her inability to form genuine human connections. Are you okay? Layla asked from the doorway, having noticed my expression. Vanessa's gone. I replied, turning the screen so she could read the email. It's strange I spent so long fearing her, then hating her, then trying to understand her. Now I just feel, I don't know, like a chapter has definitively closed. Layla nodded her own history, with Vanessa creating a shared understanding no one else could fully comprehend. What happens with Marcus now? Has there been any contact? None. I confirmed, and I prefer it that way. Whatever psychological hold Vanessa had on him, whatever his own culpability, it's not my responsibility to unravel. I've done my part by ensuring her documentation helps others. That evening, as I prepared for a dinner meeting with potential donors for the Foundation's expansion, I found myself removing my grandmother's sapphire ring from its velvet box. I had kept it stored away since Edward returned it, uncertain what to do with an object that carried such complicated history. In the soft light of my bedroom, the deep blue stone caught the glow from my bedside lamp, creating facets of light against the wall. It was beautiful. Despite everything, a piece of my heritage that predated Marcus Vanessa and all that had transpired. Perhaps it was time to reclaim it, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a symbol of resilience. I slipped it onto the ring finger of my right hand, not where it had been before, but in a new place, representing a new chapter. The weight felt strange yet familiar, like visiting a childhood home now occupied by different people. My phone chimed with a message from Robert Goldstein. Car will be outside your building at 7:00. Looking forward to introducing you to the Singapore team. They're impressed with the quarterly results and eager to discuss expansion plans. I smiled, typing a quick confirmation. The professional success I'd built in San Francisco continued to exceed expectations. My role at Goldstein International, expanding to oversee Asia-Pacific operations. The woman Marcus and Vanessa had tried to diminish now managed a division generating over $200 million in annual revenue. Looking in the mirror before heading out, I barely recognized the person I had been 3 years ago. The woman who had sat at Vanessa's dining table, suspicious of the coffee placed before her. That woman had been uncertain, constantly second-guessing her instincts, despite the mounting evidence of betrayal. The woman who gazed back at me now stood straight-backed and clear-eyed, the sapphire ring catching the light. As she smoothed her hair, she had built something meaningful from unimaginable betrayal had transformed personal suffering into purpose that helped others. Survival was just the beginning. What came after the rebuilding, the reclamation of joy, the refusal to be defined by victimhood, that was the real triumph. As I gathered my things and headed out to meet the waiting car, I felt a sense of possibility that no one, not even Vanessa with all her calculating brilliance, had been able to poison. Our new beginnings. Spring arrived in San Francisco with characteristic temperamental beauty days of brilliant sunshine interspersed with rolling fog and gentle rain. 2 years had passed since Vanessa's death, and the foundation had grown beyond anything I had initially envisioned, with satellite offices now operating in Chicago, Atlanta, and Boston. The Thornfield Protocol had been implemented in over 200 hospitals, nationwide, resulting in the identification of dozens of cases that might otherwise have gone unrecognized. Academic papers had been published based on our anonymized data, changing how medical professionals approached unexplained chronic symptoms in patients, particularly those in controlling relationships. My professional life had evolved as well. After successfully establishing Goldstein International's Asia-Pacific division, I had made the difficult decision to step back from my corporate role to focus full-time on the Foundation's expanding mission. Robert had been disappointed but supportive, becoming one of our most generous donors and remaining a valued mentor. The boardroom misses your strategic mind. He told me over lunch at his club overlooking the bay. But I can't argue with the importance of what you're building. On a particularly beautiful Saturday morning in April, I found myself wandering through the Ferry Building Farmers Market, enjoying the simple pleasure of selecting fresh produce and artisanal foods for the week ahead. These ordinary moments, choosing perfectly ripe avocados, sampling local cheeses, chatting with vendors, represented a normalcy I had once feared might never return to my life. Elise Morgan. A vaguely familiar voice called from behind me as I examined a display of spring flowers. I turned to find Daniel Lawrence, an architect I had met briefly at several industry events during my marriage to Marcus. Unlike many former acquaintances who awkwardly avoided me after the scandal broke, Daniel had sent a thoughtful email expressing support during the trial. I had appreciated the gesture but hadn't maintained contact. "Daniel, hello?" I greeted him with genuine warmth. "It's been, 3 years? Almost exactly," he confirmed, shifting his market bags to extend his hand. At around 40, he had the relaxed confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. Curly hair just beginning to gray at the temples, laugh lines crinkling around intelligent eyes, casual weekend attire that somehow looked intentional rather than thrown together. "I heard you'd relocated to San Francisco, but I didn't realize we were neighbors. I'm just up in Pacific Heights. Small world," I replied. "I'm not far from there myself, over on Divisadero." He gestured toward the coffee stand a few yards away. "I was just about to grab a drink and enjoy the view for a bit. Would you care to join me? Unless you're in a hurry, of course." The invitation was casual, clearly leaving room for a polite decline. In the past, I might have defaulted to caution, making an excuse to extract myself from unexpected social interaction. But part of my healing process had involved recognizing when walls I'd built for protection had become unnecessary barriers to connection. "That would be nice, actually," I replied. "I'm in no rush." Over locally roasted coffee at a table overlooking the bay, our conversation flowed with surprising ease. Daniel had left the prestigious architectural firm where he'd worked with Marcus to establish his own practice focused on sustainable urban housing. I got tired of designing luxury condominiums for people to use 3 weeks a year. He explained breaking a piece of shared pastry, wanted to build things that actually addressed the housing crisis instead of exacerbating it. How's that transition been? I asked, genuinely interested in his perspective on making such a significant professional shift. Challenging, rewarding, occasionally terrifying. His smile was rueful, not unlike what you've done with the Thornfield Foundation, I imagine. I raised an eyebrow. You've heard about that? I've followed your work. He admitted, the protocol you developed with Dr. Weintraub is being implemented at UCSF, where my sister works as an ER physician. She speaks highly of the training your team provided. Our conversation continued well beyond coffee, transitioning to a walk along the Embarcadero as we discovered shared interests in urban planning, contemporary art, and obscure documentaries. There was an easy rhythm to our interaction, devoid of the performative quality that had characterized so many of my social encounters in Nashville. I should probably let you get back to your Saturday, Daniel said as we approached the spot where we'd first met hours earlier. But I've really enjoyed catching up. So have I replied, surprised by how true the statement felt. Would you be open to dinner sometime next week? He asked, his directness refreshing after years of navigating unspoken agendas. There's a new place in Hayes Valley with an innovative approach to sustainable seafood. I've been wanting to try. I hesitated, old cautions rising briefly before I acknowledged them, and set them aside. I'd like that. I said simply, Tuesday works for me if you're free. After exchanging contact information, we parted ways. I continued my errands with a lightness I hadn't expected. Not the giddy excitement of a potential romance, but the pleasant realization that I was open to possibilities. Again, that fear no longer dictated my choices. My phone rang as I was loading groceries into my car, Gregory Patel's name appearing on the screen. Though he was still based in Nashville, he had remained my attorney overseeing the ongoing legal aspects of the Foundation's work. I hope this isn't interrupting your weekend, he began, but I wanted you to hear this directly from me. Rather than seeing it in the news, Marcus has been granted compassionate early release. The bag of produce in my hand tumbled to the ground, apples rolling across the parking garage floor. What? Why? He's only served 3 years of a 25-year sentence. Advanced stage lymphoma. Gregory explained, his tone grave. Apparently, he's been undergoing treatment in the prison medical facility for months, but it's progressed beyond what they can manage. The parole board approved his release to hospice care. He has weeks, maybe months. I leaned against my car trying to process this unexpected development. Where will he go? A hospice facility in eastern Tennessee. His father has arranged everything. He'll be under electronic monitoring and restricted from any contact with former victims, including you. Does he know about the Foundation? I asked, unsure why that particular question seemed important. According to Edward, yes. He's been receiving regular updates about your work. Gregory paused. Edward also mentioned that Marcus has prepared a statement for you. Specifically, he's respected your wish for no contact, but wanted you to have this, if you're willing to receive it. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately to maintain the distance I'd carefully established. But another part recognized that this might be the final chapter in a story that had defined so much of my life. You can send it. I decided, No promises about whether I'll read it. After ending the call, I finished loading my groceries with mechanical movements, my earlier lightness replaced by a complex emotional turbulence. The thought of Marcus dying stirred conflicting responses. Not satisfaction, certainly, but not sorrow either. Mostly, I felt a strange disconnection, as if hearing about the fate of a character in a book I'd read long ago. When I arrived home, I found Daniel had sent a text confirming our dinner plans for Tuesday, adding, looking forward to continuing our conversation. The normalcy of the message provided an anchor amid the day's unexpected disruption. Later that evening, Gregory forwarded Marcus's statement, a document several pages long, attached to a brief email. As promised, no need to respond unless you wish to take care of yourself, Lise. I left it unread until the following morning, using my regular Sunday meditation practice to center myself before engaging with whatever Marcus had written. When I finally opened the document over my morning tea, his words appeared on my screen like visitations from another lifetime. Elise, I've written this letter countless times in my mind over the past years, never expecting you would actually read it. Now that circumstances have forced an ending to this story, I find myself granted one final opportunity to address you directly. There is no apology adequate for what I did to you. No explanation that justifies or mitigates my actions. I betrayed you in the most fundamental way possible, using your trust as a weapon against you. For that, I accept full responsibility and the consequences that followed. What I can offer is context, not as excuse, but as information that may be valuable to your foundation's work with others. Dr. Kellerman, the prison psychologist who has worked with me these past years, believes understanding the dynamics that enabled my behavior might help prevent similar situations. My relationship with Vanessa began as one of victim and perpetrator. As you now know from her documentation, I was her first experimental subject. What began as a childhood chemistry project evolved into systematic manipulation of my physical and mental state. By the time I was 16, I had developed a dependence on her approval that overrode all other considerations, moral, ethical, emotional. When you entered my life, part of me recognized the possibility of breaking free from that dynamic, your independence, your clarity of thought, your fundamental decency. These qualities represented everything. Vanessa had systematically eliminated from my existence. I was genuinely drawn to you, genuinely in love with you in the limited way a person as damaged as I was could experience those emotions. This truth makes what followed even more unforgivable. When Vanessa perceived you as a threat to her control, I faced a choice, and I chose wrongly. Instead of protecting you, instead of breaking free, I became her accomplice. I watched you suffer, documented your pain, and continued to present myself as your devoted husband while systematically poisoning you. There is a particular kind of monstrosity in such behavior that I have had to confront during these years of imprisonment. Dr. Kellerman calls it compartmentalization. But that clinical term fails to capture the moral bankruptcy required to live such a double life. I tell you this not to elicit sympathy. I deserve none. But because the foundation you've built might help others recognize similar patterns before they progress, as far as ours did. Vanessa did not become who she was overnight, nor did I. There were intervention points that might have changed our trajectory had someone recognized what was happening. The work you're doing matters. Lives will be saved because you transformed your suffering into purpose. I've followed your progress through my father and through the medical journals Dr. Kellerman shares with me. What you've built stands in stark contrast to the destruction Vanessa and I caused. I don't ask for forgiveness or even understanding. I write simply to acknowledge the truth, to take responsibility without qualification, and to affirm that the person I pretended to be, the person who loved and supported you, was not entirely fictional. He was the self I might have become had I found the courage to break free of Vanessa's influence. As I face my own ending, I find strange comfort in knowing that you not only survived us, but transcended what we did to you. There is justice in that outcome that no court could have imposed. Marcus, I set down my tablet, my tea long cold, beside it. Outside my apartment windows, fog had rolled in overnight, shrouding the city in a soft gray light that seemed appropriate for the moment. I felt neither the anger I might have expected nor the closure such communications are supposed to provide. Instead, I experienced something more nuanced, a recognition that Marcus's letter represented his attempt at meaning-making, just as the Foundation represented mine. We had each in our own ways tried to extract something of value from the wreckage of our shared past. His effort would end with him. Mine would continue to grow and evolve, helping others long after the personal pain that catalyzed it had faded into memory. I pulled out my phone and composed a brief message to Gregory. Letter received. No response necessary. Please keep me informed of significant developments, but otherwise, I'm focused on moving forward. Then I opened my calendar to review the coming week's appointments. A meeting with Dr. Weintraub about expanding the screening protocol to pediatric cases, a fundraising dinner with potential donors from the tech industry, and now, dinner with Daniel on Tuesday. Life continued its forward motion, neither defined by what Marcus and Vanessa had done, nor entirely separate from it. The resilience I had discovered in myself wasn't about forgetting, or even forgiving, but about refusing to remain trapped in the narrative they had attempted to write for me. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift, revealing patches of blue sky beyond the gray. I wrapped my hands around my mug, reheating my tea in the microwave, a small, ordinary action that nonetheless represented everything they had tried to take from me. Agency, safety, future. As I sipped the warm tea, I thought about Daniel and our unexpected connection at the farmer's market. I wasn't ready to call it anything as definitive as a new beginning, but it was perhaps an opening, a willingness to consider possibilities I had not allowed myself to contemplate during the years of recovery. Whatever came next, I would approach it on my own terms, with clear eyes and an open heart tempered by experience. Marcus's impending death would close one chapter definitively, but the book of my life contained many more pages yet to be written. Tuesday evening arrived with characteristic San Francisco spring weather, mild temperatures, and a sky streaked with dramatic sunset colors. I chose a simple dress in deep teal, the sapphire ring on my right hand, its only accompaniment. As I waited for Daniel outside the restaurant in Hayes Valley, I felt a pleasant anticipation, untinged by the anxieties that had governed so much of my social interaction in the aftermath of the trial. "You look lovely," Daniel said as he approached, his genuine smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I was worried you might have second thoughts." "About dinner, why would I asked as we entered the restaurant, a converted industrial space warmed by reclaimed wood and ambient lighting. "Well, I did some research after we met on Saturday," he admitted as we were seated at a corner table with a view of the open kitchen. I knew about your experience in broad strokes from the news coverage, but I wanted to understand the Foundation's work more specifically. In doing so, I realized our connection through Marcus might make things complicated. I appreciated his directness. Daniel, I've spent 3 years rebuilding my life after what happened. If I avoided everyone with even a tangential connection to my past, I'd be unnecessarily limiting my present and future. He nodded, visibly relieved. Fair point. I just wanted to acknowledge it directly, rather than pretending it doesn't exist. Transparency is always preferable. I agreed, thinking of all the subtle deceptions that had characterized my marriage. Though I admit I'm more interested in hearing about your sustainable housing projects than revisiting ancient history. The evening unfolded with the easy rhythm we'd established at the farmers' market conversation, flowing between professional interests and personal stories, discovering shared perspectives and respectfully exploring differences. Daniel described growing up in a small Vermont town as the son of the local doctor. His early fascination with structures leading to architectural studies at MIT, his disillusionment with corporatized design, and subsequent reinvention as an advocate for equitable urban development. "What about you?" he asked as our entrees arrived. Setting aside the Foundation for a moment, what drives Elise Morgan when she's not changing medical protocols or advocating for victims? The question gave me pause. For so long, my identity had been defined first by survival, and then by the Foundation's mission. "I'm still figuring that out," I admitted. "For the past few years, rebuilding has been my primary focus. Now that the Foundation is established and growing, I'm beginning to rediscover parts of myself that got set aside: my love of contemporary dance, my interest in maritime history, my habit of collecting unusual teacups from places I visit." "Teacups?" he asked, eyebrows raised in amused interest. I laughed, the sound surprising even me with its lightness. "I know it sounds eccentric. It started when I moved here, a deliberate reclamation of something that had been tainted by experience. Each cup represents a place I have visited since starting over a memory that belongs solely to me. I'd like to hear about them sometime." Daniel said, his expression warm but uncalculating. The cups and the memories they represent. The invitation was gentle, open-ended, without pressure or expectation. It suggested possibility without demanding commitment, a generous approach to connection I hadn't experienced in years. As we walked through Hayes Valley after dinner, the evening air carrying the scent of nearby jasmine, Daniel asked about my plans for the coming weekend. "A group of us are volunteering with Habitat for Humanity in Oakland on Saturday, mostly architects and contractors contributing specialized skills. They're completing a development of affordable family homes. If you're interested, an extra pair of hands is always welcome." I considered the offer, appreciating its collaborative nature, rather than the pressure of a traditional second date. "I'd enjoy that," I replied. It's been a while since I've built something tangible rather than institutional. When we reached my car, Daniel's goodbye was a brief hug and a promise to email details about Saturday's volunteer opportunity. The moment was notable for what it lacked: the evaluation of romantic potential that often colors early interactions, the calculation of next steps and strategic positioning. Instead, there was simply the pleasure of connection and the possibility of growth. As I drove home through the city's hills, I found myself smiling at the unexpected turn the day had taken. 3 years ago, I had sat across from Marcus and Vanessa, at a brunch table literally fighting for my life. Today I had shared a meal with someone who approached connection with honesty and respect, who seemed interested in who I was becoming rather than what had happened to me. It wasn't a neat narrative resolution. Life rarely provides those outside of fiction. Marcus was dying in Tennessee. Vanessa was already gone, and I was still processing the complex legacy of what they had done. But alongside that continuing journey was the emergence of something new. The recognition that, while the past had shaped me, it need not confine me. When I arrived home, a message from Gregory waited in my inbox. Marcus had been transferred to hospice care, his condition deteriorating more rapidly than expected. The information landed differently than it might have even days before. Significant, but not consuming. I acknowledged it, set it aside, and turned my attention to researching habitat for humanity's Oakland project, curious about the community it would serve, and the contribution I might make. Life continued its forward motion. Spring bloomed in San Francisco. The foundation's work expanded, and in the simple act of accepting an invitation to build something alongside others, I recognized that the cup from which I now drank was one I had filled myself with purpose, with healing, and with the cautious optimism that comes from surviving the unimaginable and finding on the other side not